So guys, welcome to a chat that Vertigo and myself are gonna have now about the upcoming Gothic Remake. As two Gothic series veterans, mostly as it concerns the first two games. And we were really just thinking it would be a fun idea to, given our love for the franchise and it now getting a new lease on life, whether it's gonna turn out good or bad, we have yet to see. Just would be fun to discuss some of our expectations from it and also explain where we're coming from, why we love the series so much, why we care for it, what was maybe the aha moment for us that we fell in love with it, and what are perhaps some of its weak spots that the remake could absolutely address. What do you think, Vertigo?
Yeah, first of all, thanks for having me. We already tried this last week. I don't know if you wanted to mention it, but it was a very, very long test run. Let's say this. No, obviously I'm thrilled to talk about Gothic, who is not thrilled about this. And yeah, let's just dive into it, man.
Absolutely. And yeah, so to begin with, before we circle back to our impressions from the Nyras playable prologue and therefore our expectations from the remake, I kind of just wanted to ask you, how did you fall in love with Gothic, or why even, or what was kind of that aha moment for you when you first picked it up?
So I got introduced to Gothic by proxy via my neighbors. So we were friends back in the day. 2001, I was like 10, 11 years old, and they had a cousin, and the cousin was like 2 or 3 years older than we were. And back in the day, that was a big deal, right? If you're 11 years old and somebody is like 15 or something, that's like the big guys. Well, one day we were playing around outside, and we went to his house, and sometimes he would say, come in. And he was all, about computers and all that kind of shit. And he had the latest equipment. So it was really, really like an eye-opening moment. And we went into his apartment. He actually had his own apartment, downstairs from where his parents lived. And there he was, there was this ominous game on the screen, and we just sat down, and now I know what was going on, but back in the day, I didn't know anything. And I distinctly remember the nameless hero being on the rice fields of the new camp, and then the cousin of my friends, he said, okay, now we're going all in, we do some shenanigans. And then he pulled out, I don't know, he had no armor or anything, and he pulled out like a rusty sword or whatever and went straight for Lefty and his thugs. And that's when he cut them or tried to kill them, whatever. They pulled their weapons and completely demolished him in like 2 swings, and robbed him. I don't know if they straight up killed him, but that was such a moment, with the NPCs reacting. That was so crazy. Like the first RPG that I played, kind of open world, was Zelda Ocarina of Time. And that was like fantasy to me, everything is bright in colors and shiny and everybody is kind of friendly, but this was blowing my mind because it was so real, it was how the people were talking, how the people were reacting to what you did. And that was like the earliest memory that I have of the game. And then I got it like a few weeks later, and well, since then I'm hooked. That's so long ago. What about you?
That's a very long hook, man. Well, it was great to listen to you, because I'm willing to bet anything that most fans of Gothic, their first memory is the exchange place, but for you it's the rice fields in the new camp.
The rice fields, motherfucker.
Oh man, you must be so looking forward to seeing what they'll look like in the remake. And this is really cool, because from what you told me about that memory, you pretty much got the whole welcome to the colony treatment, the baptism, but from new camp guys, not Bullet and the other guards. And this is essentially awesome, because at the time, really, and this was, I think, one of the basic design principles by Michael Hoge, that this has to be really grounded despite being a fantasy setting. And really, one of my first memories was that whenever I try to talk to people in this game, they almost treat me like real people, as in they don't want to talk to me. which is awesome. You know, you're not gonna just approach a stranger on the street and ask them to give you a quest. And by one of the most sort of vivid memories was, I think in 2000 we got our first computer, or was it 1999, something like that. And in 2001, my brother, with his hard-earned pocket money, who was the tall guy in my case, like your neighbor was, because he's 4.5 years older, he got that boxed copy in the distance. This was back when CD Projekt were distributors of video games across Central and Eastern Europe, not developers. So there's like a huge CD Projekt logo there. And I remember just being captured by the box art. You know, the sleeper's masks, you have the archetypes of an archer, a warrior wielding an axe, a mage. And you're kind of wondering what the hell's going on in the background. There's like a battlefield artwork in the distance. And then we booted the thing up on our first computer. And our computer was an office computer. It was very, very weak. So we could barely boot it up. And we had to have the lowest viewing distance setting, meaning that everything was covered by this pinkish orange fog that the game has during daytime. Exactly. And I don't know how exactly. I remember stumbling all the way from the exchange place before I even made it to the old camp, and using, you know, plenty saves and reloads, avoiding monsters on the way, I managed to find the entrance to the Orcish cemetery, because I would just find this rope bridge across the river that leads to the swamp camp, and making it across, and at the beginning, before chapter 3, even the chompers aren't there, it's completely empty before the orcs appear there. So I was able to safely get to the entrance, and all I could see was the fog unraveling a giant skull carved into a mountain with its mouth open, serving as a gate, but the damn thing being locked, and there was a winch next to it, and the winch was jammed, of course. One of the few ways the game limits your progression if you try to get ahead of certain story points. And this to me was such a revelation that I can explore and find cool stuff and just ponder the mystery what it serves. So this for me was like the first Gothic memory I have.
That's actually a pretty cool one. I can really see it in my mind's eye, you know, when the skull appears with that dense fog, you know, like in what is it, Silent Hill, you know, where it was an artistic choice, but back in the day it was the limitations, obviously. Yeah, absolutely great. It really opened the eyes. I think of many people of our age, I want to say. And still, I mean, it's still praised today for a lot of things, you know, the response of certain NPCs when something happens in their surroundings, how they react to it. And that just screams immersion, right? And many games today struggle with this. I recently watched a little clip of, what is it called, the game that came out, Avowed, I think it's called.
By Obsidian. Mm-hmm.
Exactly. And once they were like top of the game, you know, they made really good role-playing games. And in this game, I don't really recall what was happening, but somebody tried to you know, shoot an arrow onto an NPC, and it didn't work. You know, it simply went straight through. And in Gothic, you know, right from the start, if you talk to Diego, you could attack him. You probably couldn't kill him, you know, but you could. And you had a reaction. And that was, you know, being on the rice fields and attacking somebody, and all the farmers around this place, you know, they were turning and reacting to the actions of the hero. It's mind-boggling how they did it back in the day.
And they were shouting really for their favorite in the fight. I have... Some of those quotes are kind of ingrained into my memory, and I remember how they sounded when I was little, before I even understood a word in English. So I remember the audio, but not the actual meaning. And upon replaying it later as a, you know, an early teenager,
comes back.
Yeah, because really I picked up English from watching Thomas the Tank Engine cartoons from Cartoon Network, so it took a while before I could, you know, move my way to understanding what's going on in Gothic. And at the time, CD Projekt have done a good job localizing the game, so we would at least have Czech subtitles, which is unfortunate because we are Slovaks and we didn't have a Slovak version, but we can at least understand like 95% of Czech language, so that helped somewhat to listen to English and read the Czech subtitles, and I could actually start expanding my English vocabulary all of a sudden.
I mean, come on, games making you learn another language? How cool is that, actually?
Absolutely.
Yeah, it does inspire a lot of people.
I wrote an essay about this back in my university days.
Oh, really? That's cool.
Yeah.
Like what in particular?
So essentially how combining a familiar audio with unfamiliar text, or combining familiar text with unfamiliar audio, expands your vocabulary, in essence.
Oh, I get it. Okay.
So this was essentially the case, and I kind of proposed that video games are a great medium because there's an immediate action and reaction to actually picking up the context of what you're saying. But that I think is a very worthwhile field of study, but that was almost a decade ago. But man, you actually mentioned something, a keyword in a sense. You mentioned immersion when you talked about your first impressions from Gothic. And I feel it's a word that gets thrown around a lot, not just in gaming in general, but also specifically people say immersion is one of the original Gothic's game's strongest suits. But immersion itself is a bit of a vague word. Like, what does it actually mean for the person playing it? So here is where I wanted to put you in a difficult spot and ask you, what does immersion mean for you when it comes to Gothic?
I think immersion in general, when it comes to games, is when you completely black out everything that happens around you in the real world, right? When it's like this tunnel vision that you have, you know, when going at high speeds. But in terms of gaming, you just see the monitor, the screen, and you don't really know that it's a screen anymore. You know, in a good RPG, you are inside the game. It's you, the player, doing the choices and making things happen. And that is basically what immersion is for me. Obviously, this is a very short answer, but if we try to analyze, you know, how we get immersed, I think we have to talk about immersion and also atmosphere. This goes kind of hand in hand in my book, right? And atmosphere is such a wide thing to analyze, right? Like the most common things that get mentioned is, for example, okay, it's the music, it's the ambience, you know, with crickets chirping and a waterfall and all this kind of stuff. It's the dialogue, how the dialogue is written, how the voice actors do their job, you know. And to me, there is even more things, like you cannot just pinpoint these things are an integral part to the atmosphere. It's also things like, for example, lighting. It's the textures. It's the way you can engage in a fight, you know, like the combat and combat controls, because that certainly gives you like let's say for example you're going into the woods, you know, and you have a very limited amount of swings you can do. You're an untrained fighter, right? So you're extra careful, right? Because if something jumps you, you know you cannot really bash it right in the head because, well, your arsenal and also your skill is limited. So it builds up tension, you know. And I think there are many other things as well, but I cannot recall it right now. But yeah, it's like most people would mention music and the likes, you know, building up this atmosphere. And I think in Gothic, they called lightning in a bottle back in the day because all those things fitted so perfectly and created this great atmosphere, which then immersed you into the game. What do you think?
Well, first of all, excellent points, not just as it pertains to Gothic, but video games in general. You kind of completely forget that an outside world exists, which is kind of really the kind of escapism that a lot of people look forward to in games, and Gothic provides that in spades, my goodness gracious. And for me, when it comes to specifically immersion in Gothic, one of the things that does it very well, you mentioned a lightning in a bottle. I would just like to twist that. This is more like a bottle inside lightning, and that's of course the magical ore barrier surrounding the prison colony. Because outside of the things you mentioned, you know, obviously like the sound design, the weather effects, the shadow work, and the fact that you start out weak means you take heat about every single place being a possible, spawn point for an enemy that you do not yet see. For me, it's that no matter who you are, what you do, what you achieve, and how you achieve it, there's always that reminder whenever you look up into the sky that you're just a prisoner inside the barrier because of the magical barrier keeping you in. And it serves so many functions when it comes to immersion. Well, first and foremost, it's a nice explanation for why the map isn't bigger, and I think that's a strength, because they can build upon verticality, they can make it very dense, and I especially feel now in this day and age, 2025, people are really tired and exhausted from bloat and really vast open worlds especially, and I think Gothic 3 is a perfect example of what happened when the scope just became too big. And so the barrier fits as a real good narrative and sort of framing device to keep you in there and telling you from the get-go that all the story is going to take place here. And it's up to you how you make peace with it. Do you think, okay, I'm just going to spend the rest of my life here, might as well join the old camp, which are, the toughest gang in the colony, and, I might get comfortable life with them. And I'm going to be the fool who hopes, and I'm going to join the Brotherhood or the new camp, with their own unique escape plans. And just the fact that no matter how strong I get, who I defeat, what milestone I achieve inside the barrier, there's a flash of light reminding me this is meaningless in the outside world.
Exactly. There is actually a great quote from the game. I don't know who said it, but it's something, you can become a warden, a guard, or maybe you're even part of the Ore Barons, but one thing will stop you, and that is the barrier, which is so great. Also something that greatly increases the immersion, because many games nowadays, they, like you said, vast open spaces, but somewhere, there is an invisible wall, or it will draw you back into the map, saying something. Like Witcher is a great game, but if you go too far out of bounds, there is something like, there is a screen prompt popping up and it says like, oh, there are dragons here, you got to go back. And this was such a great idea, actually, to say, okay, there is this magical dome. Obviously, you cannot pass it, because it would roast you to death. And I think we talked quickly about Gothic 2 and how Gothic 2 solved this problem by putting Corvinus on an island, which is also, it's a natural border. You cannot swim to the next continent or whatever. But I still do think that the barrier is just coming up with something like this. I could never come up with something like this. It's really great, really good.
I think there was a movie inspiration for this, Escape from New York, that
exactly
Michael Hoge mentioned. I have yet to watch this movie because it's essentially like post-apocalyptic Gothic in New York, Manhattan specifically, which is like an inescapable prison barrier with its own factions of gangs and that sort of thing.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
I'm never going to experience the movie with a fresh mind because I'm now going to be looking at it through Gothic lens, but...
Oh, it's all right. I watched it fairly recently, I want to say, and it's one of these cult classics. Actually, I've never watched it before, and then I saw this interview with Mike Hoge, where he said, it's inspired by this and that, and it's actually a good watch. It's Kurt Russell, being a grimy old dog, in terms of he being a veteran of sorts. He was in the police force or something like that, and he gets sent into Manhattan. I think it was Manhattan, and Manhattan is an island, obviously. And everything is like isolated, it's isolated in the middle of New York, and this is basically an outdoor penal facility, where all the criminals get sent to, and he has to go in there to save the president, I think. It's a great watch, sure. You can see some parallels, but even without thinking all the time about Gothic, in that regard, I think it's worth a watch. Definitely great soundtrack by what's his face, Carpenter, John Carpenter? No, I don't know. Doesn't matter.
But so it stands on its own legs even without
definitely
me being a Gothic fanboy, essentially. Okay, glad to hear it because I'm looking forward to it. And actually, it reminds me of one of the streams Michael Hoge and Kai Rosenkranz have done together. I think it was like replaying Gothic after many years, and they played in this like wooden shack. And it was sometimes I think during COVID lockdowns, in 2019 or 2021, somewhere in between. And it was a very special stream for me because on one hand, Michael Hoge and Kai Rosenkranz, for those of you who don't know, the music composer of the Gothic series, and Michael Hoge is the director behind the games. In a sense, they couldn't be more different people, because Michael Hoge is just very straight to the point, rational, and Kai Rosenkranz, big smile on his face. I call one of them a heart of the community and the other the brain of the franchise, essentially. And
that's true.
I remember that Michael Hoge was showing some of his original sketches for the game, and that's also where he mentioned the idea for Escape from New York in a fantasy setting, outside of the presentation I think he did in Poland. And it was really fascinating to see how the sketches gradually transformed, and I think it could be one of the inspirations why Gothic, also in many places, has this constant feeling of we are past the prime days of this place. Like, this place has seen much better times. What we see now is in shambles, in ruins, long past its runtime, and I feel like maybe some of that inspiration could have come from the movie. What do you think?
Definitely. Like, okay, in the movie, the place is obviously in shambles. You've got almost like this, like you said, this post-apocalyptic, oh my god, scenery, which kind of reminds you of Mad Max, which kind of reminds me of Cyberpunk, just a tiny bit, a little bit. It's obviously, there is no maintenance inside this prison zone, and that's a thing that is curious in my mind, because there seems to be no maintenance in the colony. And I think I questioned it in one of my videos, the castle in the old camp, it's really derelict already during the events of Gothic 1, and I'm like, okay, Gomez is sitting here, he's got all his guards, but why doesn't he fix, the tower that is broken down and all these things? But it's okay, he's in such a high position that he actually has no reason to think about these things, But what I do really like, that the colony is a place of many, many years, and this is what I hope will be brought up in the remake again. It's not just that the colony was kind of founded, when they needed the ore. There were times before that. And in the original, when you go down the slope into the valley, you meet Redford and Drex, and they mention that the Valley of Mines is full of ruins from the first Orc War, which I found highly interesting. And I have several videos about these topics where I ask myself, where do these structures come from? There is a little sentry tower near Kevalon's hut, which you can climb up. And was that made by the first prison guards before the barrier was summoned, or was it something from the first Orc Wars? And the implications that it would have if these ruins are actually from the first Orc Wars. That means that Khorinis was in focus of the realm, of the king's realm, for quite a while, and that kind of makes sense. My headcanon, is like, they were scouting the known world and found Khorinis, and then Roba the First, which isn't necessarily the father of Roba the Second, it could be a title. He came to Khorinis and just said, okay, we are going to put a garrison here. In which place does it make sense to put a big old castle? It's in a valley where you can basically see the whole thing. And if you're standing on the highest watchtower in the old camp, you can see the whole valley. And it makes total sense to put your barricades into, erecting your castle in the middle of the valley. Because of that, you can see any incoming attacks, right? And there are actually some real-life examples of castles, which were basically the center of a big old valley. And it's completely interesting when I'm thinking about these old ruins. I in my headcanon, the old camp fortress wasn't built just as a place to dig the ore, you know. In my headcanon, it's a bit older, but this needs to be seen. Maybe there will be some more information about it. What we definitely know is that the mountain fortress could be older, but not necessarily, because the lord who was living in the mountain fortress, he sold this land to the fire mages, right? And I don't know if the king, the Church of Innos. So I don't know if that happened by proxy because he didn't want to sell the land to the king. It seems kind of strange that he's selling this piece of land to the Church of Innos. What does the fire mages want with the Valley of Mines? The king wants the ore. That makes sense. It could be like something by proxy. I don't really know. But yeah, then we've got the old citadel on the mountain where in Gothic 2 the fire dragon sits. Also a very, very interesting location in my opinion. A citadel is usually some military installation. And what happened there? It's very much in ruins. It's very derelict. It's very old, and the architecture is different from the old camp fortress. And yeah, there are so many things, and that is what I'm going to happen. Will kind of be, I don't want a full-on explanation of all these things, but hints, here and there. Maybe you find a letter, maybe you find a book, somebody's talking about something, like ambient dialogue that you kind of pick up, and somebody's like, oh, I heard this ruin is of the first Orc War, and it was, erected under the command of Sergeant this and that, and you got a little bit of backstory to tie it all together, to glue it all together. And that's actually beautiful. I'm talking for a while now, I'm sorry. But
No.
What's really good is, back in the day when they were developing Gothic, they didn't really have a clear outline of where the story could lead. They developed Gothic 1, and then they're like, okay, we developed Gothic 2, and everything happened real fast. And Mike Hoge said that Gothic 2's story was actually developed very, very late in the process,
I think 4 months is what he said, like 4 months before the release.
Exactly, and the same thing happened with Gothic 1. So everything came together very, very sporadic and very spontaneously. And now that we have Gothic 1, Gothic 2, Gothic 3, now Alchemia can tackle this whole world building and story building with eyes on things to come. And they already did this in the Nyras demo, where they were talking about the Midlands, where they were talking about the deserts of Varand and all these kind of things. And that is a fucking good thing. Please, more of that.
Absolutely.
I love it.
No, man, this is great. And I would, I guess, just address the very first point you made, why Gomez doesn't fix the damn collapsed tower. I think the only Mason in the entire colony is Homer in New Camp. Maybe that's why.
Oh, yeah. And he's gone.
But no, seriously, what you mentioned is fascinating because, well, first and foremost, and I actually really respect this, when they started developing the first game, they didn't have this master plan of, and then we're gonna have this for the 5th of the 6 games, a part of the story, and it's definitely we're gonna have, an entire sextology of games and that sort of thing. It's just like, let's make a good game and see where that goes. And it's something that I would love to see more of in the games industry, because everyone already seems to think that this is going to be the greatest banger. We're gonna withhold this information for now and keep it for a sequel that ultimately never comes out and that sort of thing. And you can clearly tell that in Gothic 1, they didn't have everything thought out to the very detail. I think even, this could be just my theory, but they, first of all, went with things that are cool and figured them out later. So I think even some of the level designs and things like that could be just, wouldn't it be cool if there would be this high-as mountain and we would put these ruins of an ancient mysterious citadel? Yeah, let's do it. And they did it. And it's this kind of playful game design almost that I just find very charming. And we are hitting in one of the main points is that when Gothic 1 was written and created and then released, we didn't really know if it's happening on an island or mainland or wherever, although we all kind of assumed it's just part of the Kingdom of Myrtana mainland. And then come Gothic 2, they kind of said, oh, it's been happening on an island all along. And that has further implications than on all these derelict ruins. For example, the citadel at the top of the mountain where the fire dragon will make its home honestly is almost as dilapidated as the old monastery where you hunt one of the focus stones. And also it has similar architecture, similar ruined columns that you can interact with. Hopefully in the Gothic remake, the column in the ruined monastery will topple down the correct way, not like...
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
You could, however, make the jump with acrobatics without cheating on the other side. It was just insanely difficult.
Is that so? Okay. I tried it on that playthrough. I couldn't make it, but it was very fun to see the column just collapsing right into the wrong way, man.
Oh man, and you know, I even installed an unofficial patch which was supposed to fix this. It didn't. I felt lied to.
It didn't. Okay.
But on the Switch version, at least, they fixed this. And so one of the things I'm wondering is, you know, just the mention of the first Orc War. How many Orc Wars were there already? You know, from the intro, it seems like this is the first and only Orc War going on, but then you learn that this has been going on for a while, and maybe there were a couple of years of peace when both sides had to recover from the initial Orcish assault. And I really have to wonder what, given all the canon established by Gothic 2, Gothic 3, which I think actually Gothic 3 brought us some really interesting story elements and canon, and even entire cultures and countries, how much of that is going to be taken into consideration for the Gothic remake. And also, I'm not sure if this is a hot take or if maybe more people will agree, but honestly, I consider the mod released for Gothic 2, Archolos, Chronicles of Myrtana, to be honestly the best Gothic game ever made so far. It's incredible. And the way it expanded the lore, mostly focusing on the island of Archolos, also a little bit of Londram, but also some implications from the mainland and how exactly the tides have turned for the orcs, what went wrong, how the king lost his entire fleet to them. I wonder, because these are all things that chronologically already happened come Gothic 1 remake, and I wonder how many of these will be included in the Gothic remake or acknowledged either via Easter egg, either via side quest, or maybe even, you know, a major NPC making an appearance. This is kind of where I'm just... The potential is endless, and actually when we played the Nyras Prologue demo, they already did something interesting, and this is something we talked about last time, but it's that Nyras, the character you play as, mentions to Ori guarding the gate that the Varantian told me I cannot stay the night here. And in your playthrough, Kurgo was the guy who told you you cannot stay the night here, as the first character. In my playthrough, it was Diego, and now we cannot unpuzzle if by Varantian Nyras meant Diego or Kurgo, if one of these characters perhaps is originally from Varant. So they are already implementing, you know, concepts from Gothic 3 into Gothic 1, although to be fair, Varant was mentioned in Gothic 1 via books and Robar's war campaigns. But now we have a bit of a better idea, given at least Gothic 3, what Varant looks like. And I'm leaning towards the idea that it's actually Diego who is from Varant, because Varant is like the first destination he goes to when you split up at the beginning of Gothic 3. I don't know, what do you think?
Oh, true. I mean, I don't know for sure, you know, many things can even change now because it's all work in progress. But yeah, I like the idea to take a look into the future, you know, in terms of what happens chronologically and what we know so far about the universe of Gothic, and then implement it back and recycle it into a remake, which also gives you huge amounts of possibilities to increase the world building, you know, and the immersion. You're absolutely right. So if I remember correctly, Kurgo is definitely from Varant, but your argument that Diego could be also from Varant could make sense, because exactly what you say, you know, you find him in what's this village called Braga at the beginning of the desert, and you can even it's a little Easter egg, but if you say follow me, you know, it's usually meant to take him on your journey to kill some snappers or whatever, you know, something like that. But if you take him to Mor Azul, you will get an extra piece of dialogue actually.
Oh, I did not know that.
Yeah, and you get a huge chunk of experience actually. And then he stays in Mor Azul. So yeah, that is definitely a possibility. I mean, Diego was not just Diego, but everything was kind of enigmatic, you know, especially the four friends. We don't really know anything about it, about the whole constellation, and the Gothic comic. I don't know if you know the comic.
I do know of it, and I've read an English transcription of the Gothic comic that someone put together, so it at least addresses how the tower collapsed in the first place.
Exactly. It's interesting, but it's not non-canonical anymore, right?
So that's a bummer.
That's nothing to take in consideration when we're talking about the lore implications. Mm-hmm. But another thing that you mentioned, Archolos, for example, great mod. It's the best mod that I've played. It's a standalone game, and it's so rich, and you really feel that the developers really soaked in everything that Gothic 1 and 2 did and thought about, like the developers originally, and then they tried to bring it into this new world, which is basically, we know of the Eastern Archipelago, and this is basically the place where Londrum is, and what's the other island?
Archolos.
Archolos, yeah, exactly. And they expounded on this, and this whole idea comes from Gothic 2, and it's just a book that you find, you know. I think it's called The Spirit of the Wine. I don't know exactly if that is the title.
I'm not sure if Spirit of the Wine is the book you find in Vino's Distillery in Gothic 2, or if it's more of a miscellaneous book you can find amongst all those random bookcases.
Oh, you're actually, you might be right, actually. But from this one line, you know, it's like, okay, this wine is coming from the slopes of the mountain Archolos, you know, mm-hmm. and this one line is basically, you know, the reason for the remake to be done. And last time we talked about another small interesting tidbit that had no real implications in the game, but you said it. It's the ring that you find, right, for the weapons dealer mission, which is from the guild of Araxos, mm-hmm. and Araxos became one of the two guilds in Archolos, and which is just great, you know. You find a ring, and but then they make this whole thing about it, you know, with a hierarchy and with its own storylines and all that kind of stuff, and. Again, you can really feel that these guys are in the know. They know what they're doing. I'm still waiting for the next patch because it wants to make things a little bigger and
the
better.
Mod of the Decade edition, exactly. I'm holding off from my repeat playthrough until the Mod of the Decade is out.
That's what I'm doing as well.
It's a torture to wait because I just have an itch that needs scratching.
It is. And yeah, as you said, I think it's a mod that is so well done. I'm also hoping that there will be some kind of acknowledgement in the remake. You know, last time we said just a plain letter that you can find somewhere, you know, which is maybe addressed to a certain water mage from a certain man in the castle. You know, I don't want to spoil the thing. But that would be cool. I don't need more. Mm-hmm. Just a little acknowledgement that their work also gets recognized by the new team and also by the community. Obviously, it's always, you know, a gamble if you've got mods, you know, are they canonical or not?
Sure.
But I think of all the mods that I've played so far, this one has the most potential. I want to go back a little bit because you mentioned the Switch version of Gothic. And we're talking about this the last time as well, and the Switch version had some cool changes. Mm-hmm. And you said you went into the northwest of the colony and you found something.
Absolutely.
Can you elaborate on this?
Yeah, absolutely. So on my Switch, I had the proper viewing distance, unlike in my PC from 20 years back. But as I was approaching the old mine, where usually there'd be just a large piece of rubble blocking your way, suddenly on the Switch version, an entire canyon would open up. And I was kind of mind blown. What's going on here? Because I read the list of changes, the changelog for the Switch version, very detailed and nicely put together. But I don't remember reading anything about an entirely new area accessible on the map. And so I went in, and I went further and further away, kind of worried that the barrier is going to hit me very soon, because I did not expect such a long canyon. And I would find skeletons of people, you know, being crushed by the rubble, but then it would eventually lead nowhere. It would be blocked off by a large piece of rubble. But this is such a mystery to me, because my first thoughts were, okay, so we know of the old mine, we know of the free mine, we know of the abandoned mine, which is being expanded upon in the remake, but this seems like an entirely different mine in the colony that I have not heard anything about that's collapsed. Or maybe it's some kind of mountain passage into the original Valley of the Mines from a different part of the island. So this intrigued me. I was also a bit disappointed that there weren't at least some plants, mushrooms, some weapon, or maybe even trolls to chase you away in there. It was completely empty, which is a bit unfortunate, but it still makes me wonder, is this a cut content that didn't make it to the original PC release, or what is this? What was its purpose? And maybe you have some more thoughts about that.
I think I talked about this subject in the iceberg video that I did, but essentially this place in particular underwent several changes, like the whole map, obviously from alpha to beta to the finalized game. But this area once led up into the mountains, and sometimes you would find a barricade there. And the barricade in the game files would be called something like troll barricade, you know, and it was big pieces of wood, of beams with some spikes on it. And in the original first cinematic, you will see how convicts are led like a chain gang, you know, they're all chained together, and they're going into the Valley of Mines, and there is a guard, you know, with a torch or something, and you can see like the castle in the background. And it was the history of Corinus, another mod that unfortunately is, you know,
we don't
not
know
anymore.
If it's gonna be finished, or it's disbanded, or
it's disbanded.
Oh,
yeah,
I'm sorry to hear that.
What a tragedy. Yeah. But they have great videos on their channel, actually, here on YouTube. And there was, because they had access to some of the old concepts and all that kind of stuff, and they analyzed this scene in particular. And this was actually taken from the angle of the old mine. So then we take a look at other complementary material. I think it's in one of the files of the Orpheus phase of Gothic, or the Phoenix phase. And there you can see that, or you can deduct that there was meant to be another pass into the valley. So there is the very, very much north pass from which we come in, the exchange zone, but there was meant to be another mountain pass in the northwest, which some people call the Troll Ravine, like a canyon or anything like that. And in the Switch version, you saw basically the remains of a landslide coming down from the mountain. So I don't really think that it was meant to be a mine, but rather, you know, another way to Corinus, probably. And just the implementation of a more or less very empty piece of land, in my opinion, has huge implications. That means that somewhere around on Corinus, when they revisit it, probably in the future, we don't know, there must be something apart from the main pass into the valley. You know, there must be another entrance to the Valley of Mines, basically. And that is what I really, really do like. And this is basically one of these cut locations that, curiously enough, got brought back in the Switch version, and I'm pretty much up for that. Like cut content is like my pet peeve. I really want it back. Later on, I think we will talk about what makes a remake good, and this is one of the things that I will going to say. There is some very cool cut content which was planned to be in Gothic, but never made it into the game. And obviously, not every cut content should be part of the remake, but there are some things that, in my opinion, just make sense and are a great way to increase the world building and to give you a more to build upon the lore a little bit as well, you know, and give you maybe a new perspective of thinking about how things worked if they would have been implemented. But yeah. It's good.
I mean, what you're saying, so now it makes a little bit more sense, because, yeah, my first thoughts when I saw that canyon opening up was like, more collapsed mines? What the hell? But yeah, a different entrance into the Valley of Mines make perfect sense, because the currently used entrance, well, at the timeline of Gothic 1, is essentially a cliff with a giant wooden elevator, and that's not very practical, right? It's perfect for trading with prisoners and King soldiers on the other side of the barrier, but I imagine in the past there must have been some more convenient way into the valley, and this could have been it, because it would allow larger groups of people, caravans, to move across way more swiftly. So this is, again, very interesting implication. And of course for the remake, where, well, I believe Alchemia have the access to the original game's files and the Project Phoenix. I actually had no idea there was also Project Orpheus before Project Phoenix.
It was the first version, actually.
Okay, that's new to me. But so this could be one of those areas that they could absolutely elaborate upon. Now, of course, the barrier is always going to be a sort of a natural block to you making it far. But even at the beginning, if they were to, let's say, rework it and put a couple of trolls in, it could keep early players away, which is one of the natural borders that the game imposes on players. Is there's no invisible barriers, nothing like that. If you can somehow manage to outsmart or outrun the creature in your way, you can absolutely get to overpowered gear very quickly. Half the battle is knowledge in Gothic, which is absolutely amazing. And actually, one other thing I noticed as well in the Switch version was the inclusion of 2 highwaymen blocking your path to the new camp and fleecing you for ore or killing you.
Oh, yeah.
Which is awesome.
They were also part of the original game files. They
gotcha.
are in the game. Yeah.
So due to a bug, they probably didn't make it to the PC release or something like that?
No, they extort money of you, right?
Exactly.
They're like, give me some nuggets or whatever.
And they wear the New Camp Rogue outfit, so you immediately know that these are some of maybe Laris's people or just some people doing their own thing. It's an anarchy New Camp. And honestly, one of the things I would be really looking forward to the most in the remake is... so here's the thing. When you play the original, you experience the old camp, where everyone tries to extort you, take advantage of you, but also seems like the most fleshed out camp, where there's the highest number of quests, where you can get the most experience, non-lethal way. And in comparison, the other 2 camps don't seem quite as well polished as the old camp. And one of my biggest concerns is that, everyone tells you that the new camp is a place of absolute anarchy, you're gonna get your throat slit just for a piece of bread or rusty pickaxe. But in reality, the way New Camp was implemented, sure, Lefty can give you some hard time in the rice fields, but other than that, everyone's nice to you. Some people are just verbally impolite, but no one's gonna try to rob you, steal from you, attack you, nothing. There is even an NPC Wedge who warns you about an NPC called Butch.
Butch, yeah.
But Butch also never attacked me. Only if I would talk to him, he would just be insulting me and then leave me alone. So, in essence, the old camp felt more dangerous than the new camp, and I'm really hoping that this is something they could tweak in the remake, because I just felt like new camp is very clearly the good choice, and I want it to be a bit less clear maybe, or I want it to be more hostile, more inhospitable, until you prove something to the people in there. And I've even done a little social experiment. I mentioned this before, but I'm running a little pen and paper game campaign, so like Dungeons and Dragons with my friends. Different rule set system, but we are playing in Gothic universe, and the 3 players got thrown as prisoners into the colony. And I'm kind of letting real players figure the shit out, essentially. And I was thinking, there's 3 of them. There's 3 very different camps. Maybe each of them will join a different one and kind of create a network of friends like Diego, Gon, Milton, Leston. No, they all went for the new camp. They immediately said, screw the old camp, when they encountered Bloodwind or the gods. And they were also like, sect camp, nah, they're gonna screw with our heads, let's get out of here. And they all joined New Camp. And also on the stream that Kai Rosenkratz had with Michael Hoge, when they played the game after many, many years, one of the questions asked to Mike was, okay, so which is the good choice in the colony? He said, according to him, the new camp. And you can very clearly, in my opinion, feel it in the game. And this is where I hope a remake would change things around, where all camps would be almost, I know it's going to be very subjective, but each would have a significant number of good and bad sides to them. And this is one thing that I feel the original didn't nail. What do you think?
Obviously, in my opinion, practically it comes down to the quests that you get from the camps. Obviously, the old camp is like, this is the main quest hub. And if you've done all the quests in all camps in Chapter 1, there is basically only one thing to do, and that is the main quest. So the game is very front-loaded. But what I would change in a remake is definitely the amount of quests, because Gothic 1 actually is a pretty quick game to play, right? If you know your way, you know. But having more quests dealing with the everyday problems in the camps would really be an opportunity to give the player more insight of how things work. I think when talking about the new camp, I think the philosophy got kind of reinforced in the Nyras demo, actually. Because I think it was Drax who said, Laris is our boss, but only as long as he does his job well. If somebody else does it better, he's gone, basically. And that was already a little piece of world building where I'm like, yeah, they understand the assignment, you know, they're gonna explain things, how the camps work, and go a little more into depth with these things. Sure, you're completely right. There are many things that kind of lag, the Butch situation and Wedge. I mean, there are some modifications that kind of restore the old material, and I think it was the modification World of Convicts, where you have all these cut things kind of reassembled. Some of that is, I want to say, fan fiction, but some are actually characters and quest lines which were meant to be in the game. And in the case of Wedge, he warns you, you can go to Butch, and he, I don't know, he wants to instigate a fight with you, and if you hit him, you get a amulet of his body, which is very useful at the beginning, right? So there is something to it. And there's also the connection to Quentin's camp up in the northern mountains, which was kind of, you know, oh, they wear new camp clothes. Are they part of the bandits and the rogues, or are they, you know, their own thing? I always thought that it would be, you know, some type of squad that is stationed in the mountains for when the caravans go to the old mine, they are ready to ambush them. But in an interview, Mike Hoge actually confirmed that they had nothing to do with the new camp, and that there was no lore implication, like at all, you know, whatsoever. Which is a little bit tragic, but it confirms what you were saying. When they were creating the game, they didn't really think about these things. They thought like, oh, what about an outlaw gang that's living far off in the mountains? Yeah, that's cool, brother. Put it in the game, right? And years after that, we're speculating and all that kind of shit, but we're overthinking, really, the implications of the lore and the quests that you're given. I'm honest here. I don't really think that it goes too deep. Like, I love to speculate. I speculated a lot in my lore videos, but in the end, it comes just down to they wanted to make a cool game with cool ideas, you know, but sitting down and having like a wall full of text that kind of explains the background of the guilds and the gods and the whole world, they never did that. Like, if you take, for example, a look at Dark Souls, where you got Miyazaki, like the head of the projects, you know, Dark Souls and Elden Ring, like, he is thinking, in my opinion, he's thinking in advance, and he's building up all these little lore bits which have implications, and that really makes you think about, you know, how can I interpret this? How can I, you know, and in the end, Miyazaki says, you know, it all comes down to how you how your interpretation works for you. But he clearly has things set up for later titles, right? But in Gothic, again, they didn't. They just focused on what they were doing at the time and not really thinking far ahead. So it's kind of, it's fun to speculate, but it's also pointless to speculate because, well, up until now, we didn't really get a confirmation about certain things, like Quentin in the mountains, you know. But I'm pretty sure that this will be tackled in the future.
Yeah, and honestly, if we were to, you know, somehow with speculation reach the truth, we would probably in many instances just hit a wall saying, oh, well, a plot hole, that's it, let's move on. We didn't really think of this. So yeah. Absolutely, and this is where, you know, the franchise getting a new lease on life can actually empower it incredibly in the remake. At the same time, I of course want to keep my expectations a bit low because ultimately it doesn't even help the developers to have unrealistic expectations. But so far, they have demonstrated they know what they're doing in the demo and essentially everything they've put out. But yeah, actually, before I'll go to everything they've put out about the demo and, you know, our hopes from the remake, although we've already touched on our expectations from, you know, restoring some of the cut content and giving it purpose. The Cro-Magnon quest, for example, which they have confirmed they are going to include and work on. I kind of wanted to also ask about really the writing and the overall plot. So we know that the main quest has been rushed and it's been very late in the development, just hastily put together. That's also why it feels like you mentioned that it's a very front-loaded game. So essentially half the game is chapter 1 and then all the other chapters are the second half.
Exactly.
If you, of course, do all the quests and are a bit of a completionist or an explorer and don't join the old camp immediately at level 5. So what I'm wondering is, how do you think they exactly managed to pull it off that this is still a fantasy setting we are talking about, yet it feels very grounded, very down to earth, and even magic, although it exists in this world, it seems, especially for beginners, something as out there, very unreachable outside of a few precious spell scrolls. And how do you think they nailed the fact that the NPCs you talk to feel like real people in a fantasy setting with magic? Like, how can these two worlds combine?
Okay, so I need to cycle back to the beginning of our beautiful talk that we have right here, where we were talking about immersion, you know, and I was saying that one thing that's really that struck me as very amazing was how the people talked, you know, how the dialogue was written, and I don't want to sound gatekeeping or anything, but it's pretty much how the people in Western Germany talk, especially from kind of the region that I am living in. You know, it's working class people, you know, and they are very, very down to earth. They don't have fanciful language. When I got in contact with, especially like the older generation, when I was at work at my father's place, you saw a lot of these types. You know, they would just straight up say what's on their mind. You know, it's not, you know, kind of talking through back doors and implying anything. You know, if you want to buy something, you know, show me your wares. You know. Do you have a sword for me or anything like that? Or if somebody in the game gives you a quest, you know, Mordrek, for example, at the very beginning of the game, when Thoros, wants you to get rid of him, you know, they're very upfront with what they want to do, and Germans can very much identify with this way of talking, and I want to say West Germans even more so. It's very down to earth, but obviously, you know, such a language can be found in other places in the world as well. I'm not too familiar with that, but when I heard these guys talking in the game, I'm like, dude, this is like going outside, you know, and talking to people on the street, you know, and this is really what captured it, in my opinion. But I gotta ask, what was the question again? I kind of lost it here.
Yeah, I mean, you already answered it, but my question was really how on earth did they manage to combine World of Magic and a fantasy setting with something that's so down to earth? Yeah.
Okay. So I want to say it's a low fantasy. It's not a high fantasy. Definitely, high fantasy is something like that up there, Warcraft. You know, I want to say you've got Tolkien and all these things with elves and stuff, and mithril, and there is magic everywhere. Sure, there is magic in Gothic, but it's different. It feels kind of twisted. It's dark and gritty. It feels like it's only for the chosen people, the clergy of the Mages of Fire and the Circle of Water. You know, that they are the rich and powerful, exactly. You know, and this is also playing into how it's so immersive. You know, you've got these top-down hierarchies, and those guys are just living the life inside a penal colony that you can only dream of. And I think what also makes it so down to earth is like what the people are talking about, what kind of problems they have. You know, when you, I think a very cool example is Kyle, the dude who has two doors, right? He is relatively, he's a newcomer, and somebody just said, yeah, don't build your hut next to the I don't know, how do you say it? Next to the ridge.
Ditch.
The ditch, yeah, exactly, the ditch. And you know, instead of asking, you know, why or whatever, he's just stubborn and does it. And then he's really upset that suddenly people have nowhere to walk anymore, and they break in his hut, and now he's got you know, a house with two doors, basically, with everybody walking inside. It's kind of relatable, you know. He's like the stupid, stubborn guy, and he did a rookie mistake, and he's got to pay for it, you know. Another quest that I really think is kind of, you know, putting a focus on lesser known characters is the quest with Dusty. Dusty is in the old camp, and his comrade, his friend, what's his face? Melvin?
Melvin. Mm-hmm.
Melvin. He went off to the swamp, right? Because he got some sweet talk by the Baals in the outer ring, and they probably said, yeah, you should check it out, you know. And then he's like, oh man, I wonder how he is doing, you know, because I'm working in the mines and all of that, you know. And getting into the headspace of these diggers, your life is in peril. Your life is miserable. All you do is working in a very deep mine with huge insects crawling around that can kill you anytime. It's a very dangerous job. And if a mine crawler doesn't kill you, you probably just die of exhaustion, you know. And there's just a little luxury that you can buy in life, which is stale beer and all this kind of crap, you know, which just keeps you going. And you can relate to that, you know. You slave away in your job every day, and then somebody comes around and tells you, you know, there is a different way actually. There is a camp in the swamp, and we're smoking weed all the day, you know. And you're like, damn, how could I have missed this? You know, I gotta go there. Very relatable actually. But these are just two examples, you know. That really made this game feel realistic. And when it comes to the magic, again, at the beginning of the game, it seems so far away, you know? You know that there is magic because there is this magic dome, right? But nothing much indicates that there is magic. You get the letter at the beginning for the fire mages, so you know there is magic, but you don't really see it. And I think for me, the first time that I really saw some magic was when I went into the old, into the castle, or it was at the water mage's place, where I saw them actually performing magic, you know, as some kind of idle animation. And then you're like, oh, this is what magic looks like, you know, this is fascinating. And magic is kind of very vague. It's a piece of lore that is not very deep. We know that there is some strange happening that is described in a book, for example, in Gothic 2. And I want to compare it to the conjunction of spheres. It's about star constellations. And it says that if the stars align in the right way, the barriers between the worlds become thin and possible, you know, and can be traversed by other beings. Obviously, this is some kind of weird magic going on. But what also helps, again, it's not like this high fantasy magic. It's like, oh, light of the dawn, bless me, or whatever, you know. We got a little bit of that in Gothic 2 with the light magic of the paladins and the holy arrow and all that kind of shit.
Banish evil, yeah.
Banish evil, exactly. But also it's this very dark and almost necromantic kind of magic that we saw in Gothic 1, you know, with the sleeper being summoned and the shamans of the orcs, they had to give their heart, and he used these hearts to basically anchor himself in this world, right? And then, well, once you stab the hearts, he's off to his home dimension. But yet again, I want to cycle back to the mages and how they feel like the clergy in our real world, where everything is kind of secret. You know, you don't really know what's going on behind closed doors, and that gave you a sense of mysticism. You know, at the same time, you can relate when there is a clergyman in the town of Corinus, for example, and he's like, "Oh, what can you give our Lord Innos? Let me take a look. Oh, you got 50 gold pieces, you know." And we all know how the Middle Ages worked in our world. You know, where you can
buy redemption.
Buy redemption, you know, and the money was taken to build big old cathedrals and all that kind of shit, you know. Again, it's very relatable. It's kind of twisted, but at the same time, you've got this grounded feeling, and I think that's what it's about, you know, in that regard. But what do you think?
Man, I mean, you hit so many nails on the head. I think, first of all, when it comes to the grounded characters, they're down to earth, that sound like your, you know, Western Germany working class. I of course, don't know exactly what that like is, what it is like being in Slovakia, but to me, the characters always also sounded like the working class here. That exactly, they would tell you what's on their mind, what they're thinking. They would not be too preoccupied about being polite or skirting around the issue or anything like that. And also in a place where you kind of are constantly in a fight or flight mode, it makes perfect sense to communicate clearly across what you need in as few words as possible. So this, I think, is a very strong point to anchor us in the story, and this is where we are. And you can actually feel that when in Gothic 2 you make it to the city of Corinnis, and the people there are not really as upfront as they were inside the colony, which is perfectly handled. And one of the things you mentioned is really interesting in the case of Dusty the Digger, right? The life that waits for him inside the old camp is to an extent safe, yes, as in he's probably not going to be eaten by wild beasts or necessarily be attacked and killed, but he does have to slave away in the old mine, kind of like Gomez used to in the past when he was a prisoner. The irony is perfect in the scenario that the big liberation, and essentially we're doing the exact same thing for slightly different reasons. And he's facing a danger from mine crawlers. The guards should keep the diggers safe, but as we know, they are not too keen to lift a finger to help someone who they see as less than people, the lowest caste of
somebody who didn't pay them, maybe.
Or who didn't pay protection money, exactly. Which is actually, I love the little sentence that Templars from the Brotherhood are very popular in the mines, because they do it with almost religious zealotry. So exactly. They are actually better at protecting the diggers than the guards assigned to protect the diggers, which is phenomenal. And I think one of the ways it is so grounded is that almost every single character seems to have been written in a way of not what I can do for the main character, but what can the main character do for me. In a sense, you know, many, and fantasy genre is especially, I think, guilty of this. There's this thing called main character syndrome, where you are the center of the universe and the story, everything happens around you for a reason. In Gothic, it's the exact opposite. You are an absolute nobody up until you start tackling the main story, which is unfortunately how it twists a little. But again, something I hope the remake will address. But here it's every single NPC feels like they're the main character and they treat you that way. And I honestly have yet to really experience this in many video games in general. And I remember Michael Hoge also giving his lecture and presentation about how the characters were written. And the alpha and omega of everything was the caste system inside the colony. Whether you were factionless or joined one of the 3 major factions, it would always be set up in, okay, are you the digger or the scraper? Are you the shadow or the rogue? Are you the mercenary or the god? Or are you water mage, fire mage, an ore baron, whatever? Or a Templar and novice, and you actually couldn't become a guru, which is restored by some of the mods, I noticed. But each such character archetype would have mixed and match responses to current events. So a digger would look at things very differently than a guru or a mercenary. And somehow they managed to make this very well consistent across all unnamed characters, even some named characters in the game. And also, within each such archetypes, there were like 3 to 5 different variations of a subset of a dialogue they would repeat based on the story and their caste system. So, in essence, they've managed to simulate a real breathing, living world, and this social class system almost, you know, a mage speaking differently than a scraper, is what was so immersive, down-to-earth, and grounded about the writing. And so that was phenomenally well done. And also the fact that magic, despite being the opposite of a grounded setting, was so inaccessible, reserved just for the elite, and you really had to work hard to actually have a mana pool and spells to be more proficient at magic than, let's say, a one-handed weapon, right? Which is why most people, when they play mage, they end up at least mastering one-handed weapon or something. So, again, it's this writing where every single NPC and character is written as if they were the main character. And I did get that impression from the Nyras prologue. Everyone had a unspoken story behind their life that they didn't need to share. They knew what happened, why it happened, what they had to go through to get where they are, and they'll be damned if they're gonna let anyone else take their spot. And this, to me, was just such a powerful grounding mechanism. And it's ironic how much the main story of both Gothic 1 and Gothic 2 is the exact opposite of that, in a sense.
Exactly. There is one character that really, when we were talking about the main character syndrome, or that everybody is treated like he's the main character. I forgot his name. I wrote down Grimes, but Grimes is the old guy in the old mine. Mm-hmm. But I am talking about, maybe his name is Grim, can that be? When you enter through the main gate of the old camp, there is this guy, and if you don't pay Bloodwin, he will give you this little quest, and he's like, "Oh, there's a dude outside, and he's got an amulet. Do you fancy coming with me?" And you're sure. I want some nuggets, you know. And then he rubs you basically at gunpoint with his 2 friends, you know. And later on, I don't know if that is a mod, but I don't think so. He is working to get into the shadows at the same time like you, you know. He is aspiring to be something like you. And he's got the upper hand for a short time, but then you show him who's boss, you know. And you're absolutely right. These characters, how they're written, it's absolutely like they have their own agenda, they do their own thing, and that contributes greatly to this immersive and down-to-earth atmosphere and perception.
Yeah, Grim is his name, exactly, and it's fascinating because it starts out friendly. You are both newcomers, you're on the same ship, you have this lovely exchange. The dialogue is a little bit different if you talk to him before or after being given the test of faith by Diego. And it's interesting that it looks like this could be kind of the first friend you're gonna find, unless you encountered Mud, of course. And and you are essentially, if you in a good faith follow him, he's gonna take advantage of the upper hand, and he's gonna do absolutely what's necessary to advance. And it'd be really interesting, because if I ask myself as a player character, if he didn't pay Bloodwin, and I would talk to Bloodwin looking to score some brownie points to increase my reputation in the old camp, and he said, "This guy didn't pay, you know, do something about it," would I have accepted that quest? And probably the completionist in me would say absolutely yes. And later on in Gothic 2, you can actually end up extorting farmers for gold for Onar if you choose that path. rather than fighting militia, right? So it's a nice little bit of analogy to this situation from the old camp. And this is such a perfect quest to illustrate that you are not unique, or you are as unique as everyone else, and what you make with the situation you're in is entirely up to you. For example, I would very quickly try and make it, now that I played Gothic and I know what's where, I would try to make it to the cave filled with mole rats to find Neck being dead in there when collecting mushrooms. And I would lie to, what was his name? Sly. I would lie to Sly that I do not have the amulet and keep it to myself because it gave me 5+ defense, which is powerful if you have no armor. Suddenly, scavengers will not free hit you, but you can take much more damage with this amulet. And I would keep it on me up until the very end when I'm ready to join a faction and get a proper armor, and I would steal a much better amulet from the Orc Baron's house. But it's just... exactly, this is so very grounding that everyone's in it for themselves, and that's why characters like Diego, Lester, Gorn, Milton stand out so much, because these are people who are not immediately thinking of how to use you. Well, Diego actually is, but that's not here or there. And it takes a while, but you earn their trust, and you also realize that these guys have been doing this far longer than you've been around. And again, this just grounds you in a living, breathing world. And if I'm not mistaken, and I learned this in your iceberg video, these 4 friends were supposed to be part of some thieves guild operating in the colony, the Masters, right?
Oh yeah, exactly.
Ah, gotcha. Exactly. But I'm glad that at least in this form, they made it across to the final game, in a sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was another vision they had for, I think it was back then when it's called Orpheus, that the Masters were another guild that was operating in every camp, you know, like a sub-guild. And they kind of took this idea and wanted to implement the Thieves Guild in Gothic 2, but yeah, not to such an extent.
Gotcha.
One thing that you said about Gothic 2 rings very true to me, and over the years I learned to really appreciate that the storytelling and the plot of Gothic 1 is way better than Gothic 2's. I am currently doing a video of restructuring kind of the story of Gothic 2 so it fits more. And I'm talking about these things that you really get the feeling that, okay, at the very beginning you feel still like somebody who's got to prove himself, but later on you become, you know, the chosen one. And Gothic 3 builds heavily upon it. To be quite honest, the chosen one thing, you know, is part of Gothic 1 actually. You know, when Xardus tells you there is a prophecy, but it was very ambiguous. And I always thought, this is obviously my headcanon, that the Nameless Hero was just a guy with a whole lot of determination, you know. And like everybody is speculating about him, oh, is he serving Beliar or Innos or maybe even Adanos, you know? Who cares? He's just some powerful guy to kick ass, you know? And this is why I prefer a Gothic 1 story. Gothic 2 obviously has better gameplay, but it becomes too fast, you know, oh, you are the chosen one. And you're basically told this in the very first 5 or 10 minutes by Xardus, you know.
Huge exposition right at the beginning and setting the course for the main story rather than letting you figure out what's gonna happen and put the pieces together yourself.
No. A little fact, when I was at Gamescom and I was talking to Kai Rosenkranz and Reinhard Pollitscher, I was actually talking about this. I was like, Gothic 2 starts off with a huge exposition dump, you know. What are your thoughts on this, you know? And I think it was at least Kai Rosenkranz who said, yeah, you're right, there is too much information and it feels kind of video gamey, you know? So I don't want to speculate too much, but maybe they will change this up in a future project, maybe.
I mean, look, awareness of a problem is always the first step, so absolutely, yeah. I mean, really, the first conversation you had in Xardus in his new tower in Korinis was essentially being given all the information you would in any other game open up a quest log for. This is the enemy, this is the key item you need, this is roughly, it's not actually time limited, but this is roughly how much time you have, and this is the fastest way to get to it, go. And it's such a departure from the original, and it's interesting. I still am not really sure if I love Gothic 1 or Gothic 2 more, but in this regard, Gothic 2 hit the nail on the head way better, and that actually brings me to another point, because you mentioned a prophecy, and Zardas in the first Gothic game being the one who mentions it at some point. And it's a very, very important point, and it almost made me cry the first time I had the conversation with Zardas, and I'll tell you why. He says something absolutely wonderful to you. He says, "You are now the most powerful person in the colony." And this just warms my heart so much, that there is this insanely powerful NPC who you know very little about, but you know that he's telling you the truth every single time. He's almost like this wise man in the mountain, a character. And he essentially, after everything you've been through, after billion saves and reloads mid-combat, after being eaten by a pack of scavengers and mole rats, after so much trial and error and just never giving up and just being dedicated, there is someone out there whose opinion matters to you more than Gomez or even Lee, who tells you, you are the most powerful man in the colony right now. And this, I think, is a good segue to another topic I wanted to discuss, and that's progression. Because progression is something that's very special about the first game. And I really have yet to find a game that scratches the same kind of itch. Maybe Risen 1 or even Risen 3 did a decent job when it comes to progression. But, and I have not yet played Alex games, so we'll see. But what do you think about progression in Gothic? Why do you think this word is used so often?
It's spot on. You start off as a complete nobody. Not just narratively, but also gameplay, and you know, you don't have any stats. You're very limited. You cannot fight anything. One mole rat could potentially become a huge problem, and now with the knowledge right now, you can break the game very easily. But let's say you play it for the first time, you know, like it is meant to be. Every single piece of items, every single piece of equipment, any item that you pick up is useful. You know, when I'm running around in, let's say Skyrim, for example, there is so much shit that I can pick up, but it basically is not very useful.
A bucket, a ladle.
yeah, exactly. These are fluff items that you can sell, but come on, there's gold thrown at you, you know. And in Gothic, it's really, again, the character progression in terms of fighting. It's very noticeable when you get better. Very, very noticeable. You know, suddenly you can string 4 attacks together. Suddenly you can attack, I don't want to say faster, but you don't have any combos when you're untrained, right? So it's just one hit at a time. You
can do left and right, but it's so slow, has such short reach that it's really ill-advised.
Exactly, and then you train to become a swordsman, you know, and it suddenly it opens up a new world, so to speak. So let me reposition myself. What I really like, first of all, you've got an open world that is completely open, right? You can go everywhere. There are no invisible walls whatsoever. The only thing that stops you are the enemies. So, and what they did, or what many other modern games do, they use scaling. So it doesn't matter, you know, if you're level 1, you can go into that zone and you can kill the enemy because it's scaled down to your level, right? But as you gain levels, so do the enemies. I don't like the system.
Neither do I.
Like you said in the beginning, you can potentially go anywhere. If you outsmart your enemies, if you're faster than them, you can explore the whole thing. That's what I did.
Transformation scrolls. Great tool.
Transformation scroll, yeah. Bloodfly scroll, and you're fast as hell, and you can take a look at everything. And basically just, if you can pass an enemy, you know, you're free to go there. And with this progression that is not just felt, but also visible on your character, how you hold your swords, and what kind of spells you can conjure. This is on many levels, not just, you know, in terms of gameplay, but also visually, a very big achievement. You know, the first time you're running around with a sword like this, you know, in 2 hands, and then suddenly you've got 1 hand. And if somebody pulls a sword on you and he's, you know, holding it down sideways, you know you're fucked, right? you know he's a master of his skill, and this is also so incredible. Also, again, immersive and building up atmosphere, but progression. There's also the sense of monetary progression. You know, what kind of goods you can find, and again, in Skyrim, it's not that necessary to pick everything up, but in Gothic, you are pretty much limited. You know, there is a scroll, let's say, Rain of Fire. It costs like 500 gold. That's a good bit, right? If you wanna buy some strength potions that increase your strength permanently, they are like 1,000, 1K.
1,500, yeah.
1,500, or if you want to buy the books that give you like two-handed or one-handed combat, it's like 5,000. That's a huge chunk of money. So everything you're going to pick up will at some point be worthwhile, and that makes exploration first and foremost necessary, but also very rewarding. You know, to look behind every nook and cranny to find something, and suddenly, you know, at the beginning of the game, you're struggling to pay the fire mage. What's his face? I forgot it. No. In Gothic 2, you know,
Darien maybe on the marketplace.
Yeah, Darren, exactly. He wants 50 gold, and you're like, oh no, man, you know. But it actually pays. It pays for you because you get some stats in return. You know, if you pay him more than that.
Actually, sorry, just to interject, you can absolutely drop your gold in front of him, then talk to him, tell him you're poor, and he's gonna give you gold for free. He actually is charitable.
Really?
Yes. And then later on, when you have more gold, you can still come back and get the blessings via 50 gold each time to increase your stats. I just thought it's really interesting.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I would screw him over like this.
Jesus Christ.
But shows his charitable side as well, so he does follow some statutes of Enos. Yeah, some morals.
I didn't know this. This is, dude. I have to try this.
Yeah, go ahead.
And this also shows how the developers thought of all these options. You know, in this scenario you got money. In the other scenario you don't have any money. And again, immersion. Again, it's grounded. You know, if you see a beggar on the street, you pop him a coin. You know, if your pockets are full of money, you expect a charitable donation to your cause, whatever. I did this at the very beginning with one of the bandits when you come down past Cavalorn and he talks to you about being robbed by some bandits. And you can go there first and drop your gold, and then you talk about, you know, who's your leader, and he's like, I cannot say it, you know, I cannot really be upfront with you, and then you're like, okay, I give you 10 gold pieces, and you give me the name. He's like, yeah, all right, his name's Dexter, you know, and then you're like, oh shit, I don't have any money, you know, and he's like, okay, you got me, which is cool. But yeah, in Gothic 1, it was very, very easy to become rich very, very early on in the game. You know, if you strafe walk into the castle, or you pull your weapon out and sneak past the guards, you can make your way into the House of the Ore Barons, rob the whole place, and you don't have to think about money for the rest of your playthrough. Right? In Gothic 2, it's a little bit different. You have to earn your share, and you can do so by, for example, applying for jobs, which are very helpful at the beginning of the game, right? If you sell first to Bosper, if you... well, smithing is not that helpful because there is no option to sell him multiple swords. I think it's only one sword of each kind that you can sell him.
Oh, you mean to Harad?
Harad, yeah, exactly.
Gotcha.
Exactly. And then you can make a decent chunk of money. But at the same time, and this is why I love the economy so much, because things actually are a little bit, you know, expensive at times. If you want to buy a new piece of armor or a good sword, whatever. I never buy weapons because I know where to find them. But if you want to do that, you know, you need to save some money, and you really make money because you pick everything up, but you also got to spend it. You know, it's like a healthy economy, and you cannot buy everything. You really need to know what kind of skill you want to invest in, and that again, it's not like I'm always comparing it to Skyrim, but I'm not very knowledgeable about it. But you cannot max everything out, you know? At the beginning of the game, you got to choose, oh, is this an archer playthrough? Is this one hand plus magic, maybe? You know, but there is nothing more, you know? You cannot go for a ranged weapon, for magic, and a melee weapon, you know? You cannot do it. You cannot be a jack of all trades. And this is also, it seems like limiting for a new player, but it really kind of makes sense, and you got to plan your way. And there is no way to reset your skills, right? So if you're misstepping, if you're making mistakes, you got to live with that. You know, I mean, you could reload, but still, the point stands. And the progression system is just wonderful. I have yet to experience it in any other game.
Man,
that is so powerful.
And where every improvement just feels significant. I mean, it's interesting because in a sense, Gothic is the opposite of power fantasy, because it's a fantasy where you are everything but powerful in the beginning. I actually like to refer to Gothic as more of a hard work and achievement fantasy, where you're in this environment where you use the tools at your disposal to truly become someone in the social hierarchy, as well as mechanically powerful. And when it comes to the progression itself, it's really interesting because every entry in the franchise handled it a bit differently. And I really adore the progression of Gothic 1, because you absolutely have to stick with your choices, but at the same time, the game is relatively generous if you go out of your way to do extra quests and explore and hunt, that you can play. You can even put skill points into skills you will not necessarily use. I mean, at one point I finished an entire playthrough where I mastered pickpocketing and lockpicking. I just wanted to see what it would be like. And it's interesting because kind of my favorite build in Gothic 1 is essentially mastering one-handed, two-handed weapons, bows and crossbows, all 4 weapon types. To be fair, crossbows are an improvement of bows and two-handed weapons are an improvement of one-handed in Gothic 1. It took Gothic 2 to kind of revise the system where you can choose. And but there's enough learning points to do that. You are just gonna have to ditch magic altogether. That's kind of the main decision. But you can be both a dexterous and strong and ranged and melee character, or you can focus on magic and I guess accompany that with just one-handed weapons or something. Now in Gothic 2, they changed things so much because, and this is where I think Gothic 2 did a terrible job with the Night of the Raven expansion rebalancing, because I think they did the opposite. They debalanced the game, and now you kind of are forced to min-max your stats and know in advance before committing to something. And for new players, this is, I think, very bad. For us veterans, it's fine. We know what's up ahead. We know how many stews you can get from Tekla and that sort of thing. But it really doesn't leave any space for playing or trying something out. And this is a big problem. This is where I would appreciate, well, it's a Gothic 1 remake, not a Gothic 2 remake, but if they were to take a leaf from the first game more so, then there would be at least some leeway to even dump learning points into something that's not going to be necessarily useful, but you at least gave it a go. And again, I feel like Archolos, Chronicles of Myrtana, the Gothic 2 mod, did an outstanding job. First of all, you cannot be a jack of all trades as much as in Gothic 1, but you also don't have to min-max like in Gothic 2 for one simple reason. Every attribute has a separate trackle. What's your natural score? And what's your score with all permanent boosting effects applied? Meaning you don't have to hold off for late game to drink all those potions you collected. You can do it immediately. Same goes for perma-boosting food. And this is again... Archolos is where I hope they'll draw the inspiration from when it comes to progression, balancing, and min-maxing versus playing around with some learning points and that sort of thing. This is kind of my hope and expectation. But also to get to the original point, Gothic 1 revolutionized what it means to have a progression in a role-playing game, because every single improvement, like you already mentioned, you feel. You can actually, using Marvin mode, you can, sort of transfer yourself into the character you're facing, and it's interesting to do that for every creature and open up their character sheet and take a look at their stats. You'll see exactly how many health points or what kinds of defenses an orc has, a mole rat, and that sort of thing, and I tend to screenshot them and have them in a separate folder just as a reference.
Okay, cool.
It's awesome. And so you know exactly what you're dealing with, and all the creatures and characters follow exactly the same rules of combat that you do. The only exception being if someone pulls out a bow, you save and load, they get stuck. But that's a bug. That's a different story. But so it feels like, again, we're now getting into immersion in a sense, but everyone follows the same rules as you do. You don't have any special moves or abilities that other characters wouldn't have, outside of the fact that you can save and load. And
acrobatics.
Oh, no one has acrobatics, that's true. Excellent point, I stand corrected. And it really reinforces the fact that you have the same playing field and the same chance as everyone to make something out of yourself. And again, I really hope they'll nail this in the remake. And yeah, so those are my thoughts on Gothic's progression. And again, I remember being so disappointed with Gothic 3 when I saved up learning points. I learned improved swordsmanship and the animations didn't change. I'm like,
nothing happens. Yeah.
What? I do slightly increased damage? I could have just improved my strength, right? And it's such a staple of the series. And again, Alchemia have demonstrated that this is the path they're taking via the playable demo, where Kurgo teaches you how to improve your sword fighting early on.
Exactly. One thing I want to add, if for especially for new players, if you kind of skilled into the wrong way and you're like, oh, I don't really want this, maybe some kind of potion that lets you reset your stuff, but it's kind of expensive. We're talking 5k gold, for example. But it also has certain implications. For example, some quests are tied to your skills, right? Fingers, for example, wants you to learn a certain skill to be part of the old camp. So I don't really know how that could work out. But sure, okay. Or you have to communicate right from the start. You have a limited amount of levels, ergo learning points, skill points, and you need to invest them wisely. You have to make up your mind what kind of archetype you want to be. And I think you can there is still a wide range of errors that you can make, but maybe there is a way around that. But
maybe also this respec possibility could happen, I don't know, 3 times in the game as an optional quest reward or something like that. That it would be a limited resource. Sure. And it wouldn't necessarily cost you arm and leg, but you would have some opportunity to reconsider. But yes, it does have implications. In Gothic 1, there was that one situation where you could change your guild because of certain story events. And I don't know if that's going to also happen in the remake. I assume to some extent, yes. But it could also potentially break things because, for example, what I love about Gothic's progression is, let's say, unlike Dungeons and Dragons, where you are born a certain class and that's what you are for the rest of your life. Here you are the outcome and the consequence of your actions, and the people you get in touch with, you join up with, and that they teach you their transferable skills. That's who you are. And respecing like this could, in a sense, you would cease to be the product of the people you teamed up with. But honestly, is that really such a huge problem? Maybe, having to start a game again or playing with a character you no longer enjoy, that's an even bigger problem. And at some point, the devs have to make a decision. You can't really have both, so which one is a bigger pain? And let's fix that, despite the fact that it might have a bit of story implications. I don't know how I feel about that. But ultimately, I am always for, more options, more settings, more respec. So maybe they can make an achievement for playing the game without using a respec. I don't know. There are all sorts of ways to encourage and discourage certain things.
Yeah. True.
And Vertigo, one of the topics you actually already opened up is spending, gold, and economy. And I feel strongly about this topic in RPGs.
You told me.
So you already mentioned this as far as it pertains to Gothic 1, that you can essentially get into the Ore Baron's house and be rich for the end of the game. And the economy being much tighter in Gothic 2, right? Where permanent boosting things will cost you arm and a leg. I actually really appreciate what Gothic 2 did in this regard, that everything's so expensive, but you can still pull it off if you sacrifice some learning points for pickpocketing, lockpicking, or even what I did, I often do it in my playthroughs, is learn how to forge the basic swords for 2 learning points, because you can turn that into thousands and thousands of gold coins very easily, and it's kind of just 2 learning points. And
Are you talking about Gothic 1 or Gothic 2 right now?
Gothic 2. Gothic 2.
Okay.
So I learn only the basic swords, not the better ones, because you can find better weapons than you can forge because of the Knight of the Raven expansion. But I only learn how to forge the very basic ones, so that I can buy steel billets from vendors for 10 gold and sell the sword for, what is it, like 75 or something like that.
Oh yeah, okay.
So it's a nice example of where you can sacrifice some of your build to generate money and to turn that into more resources. And what are your thoughts when it comes to this for Gothic 1, Gothic 2, and what would you hope to see in the remake?
I'm not very sure about this. I like some soft turn-in quests, I want to call them, that were available via certain mods for Gothic 1, for example. You can find these old coins, right? They have no use, you cannot sell them, but in World of Convicts, for example, you can give them to Diego, and he's like, okay, I will give you 1 ore nugget for 1 coin that you find. You know, it's kind of this passive income. Same thing that happens in Gothic 2 with the old coins, where you can hand them over to the right hand of owner Vasily, exactly, and you can haggle a little bit with him, and you can, I think you can get up to 5 coins.
I never managed to do that. Even if I proposed 2 coins, he would tell me to go blow myself. So I was like, oh.
But it works. It totally works. And I've never made it so far. So you really need to haggle with him. And that's actually, you know, a piece of good passive income. But it should be kind of a struggle, you know. I was a little bit mad that Bosper takes all your furs. If you've given him 6 pelts of wolf fur, you know, you can give him much more than that, you know. But again, Harad, he only takes 1 sword of each type. I think it's for balancing issues. But your job, if there ever is one, or your professions in the Gothic remake, should give you the opportunity to hand some items in, even if it's like for alchemy, basic health potions, you know, and somebody wants them for whatever reason, you should be able to hand them in, get some money in return, to get a more stable economy going. What I obviously don't really like is giving you the way of making vast amounts of money very easily, like, you know, going into the old Camp Castle. This should be possible later on, and only with a sufficient skill in pickpocketing and lockpicking. You know, when you invest your learning points in these things, then you also will be able to generate more money. But even the basic stuff, alchemy, blacksmithing, and all this kind of stuff should help you on your way. Obviously, exploring is another pillar of generating money. My favorite one, actually, because it combines, you know, exploring with making money. Quests, sure, they can give you money, but I'm very much for, if there are any power-up items that give you a permanent boost, they should be a gold sink, so they should cost a good amount of ore or gold, whatever. And the economy should be... it should be fair, but you shouldn't have these amounts of wealth, because it's basically a kind of a pay to win if you can buy everything, you know. And I like that there is a thin line that you need to walk to really make the best out of your playthrough. You know, you shouldn't be able to invest everything and get everything. There should be drawbacks to your decisions. And again, I think Gothic 2 did a way better job at that. There's also more variety on how to make money, again, with the coins, for example, with the turning in furs and weapons and all that kind of stuff. And I think these are some very interesting concepts that you can obviously translate into a Gothic 1 remake. I don't know if to which extent, but they already said they would tackle professions because they were basically non-existent in Gothic 1. You could forge some swords, but there's no alchemy, and yeah. Maybe you can go and bet on the fights in the arena as well, and you can make some money,
And participate.
I'd like to see that and participate. You bet on yourself, and maybe there is a really really hard enemy that you're fighting against, and you can kind of put something in his drink or anything, if you're an alchemist, for example, to make things easier. That's also something that I wanted to bring up. If you have multiple solutions to one and the same problem, are you going the straight up route by just, in this example, be victorious over this guy in the arena? Can you do something to him that he becomes weaker, or can you manage to soft talk him into not being really hard on you in the arena, and you share the outcome? Whatever, something like that, But getting back to the economics, I think it should be stricter like in Gothic 1, more like Gothic 2, but obviously there's room to improve. Mm-hmm. What do you think?
Well, yeah, I agree that it should be more like Gothic 2, and again, the idea that things would open up and be multiple choice on how to solve problems you have, given how resourceful you are, and this is a big part of that, the resourcefulness. There's actually design principle for RPGs or any kind of video game with progression. There's this vertical progression where the numbers go up, and then there's horizontal progression where you just get more tools into your toolbox you can use for different situations. So these are two different approaches. And I love the idea of sacrificing some of that vertical progression for resources, for money, for essentially buying overpowered gear early, or perhaps some spell scrolls that are one use, very expensive, and to essentially progress more horizontally. That's kind of one of my greatest joys in RPGs, and this is what I'm hoping the Gothic Remake will nail. And again, coming back to Archolos, Chronicles of Myrtana, man, the economy there is absolutely fierce. I was constantly starved for gold, and even Gothic 2, which is already way stricter than Gothic 1, taught me I can have enough money to buy every single permanent boosting potion. Forget about it. In Archolos, you have to just stick to the attribute you actually need and forget about all else. Also, I'm a collector of crafting recipes of everything in games. All potions, blueprints, whatever. So this completely ruined me in Archolos, because I wanted all the cooking recipes, I wanted to know how to craft all the spears even though I'll never use them, etc., right? And now upon my second playthrough, where I'm waiting for the Mod of the Decade patch, I'm gonna be smarter this time around. And yeah, so I think Archolos is again a great blueprint for how to implement a really strict economy, where you can sacrifice some learning points from that vertical progression into getting cool stuff via the horizontal progression, essentially.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if you have the option to do that, I'm like you, always up for options. If you can sacrifice something to get more money, sure. But you should also have the option to just go for it straight away, if you're a little more straightforward in that direction. But yeah, you're completely right, definitely.
Awesome. Anyway, this topic is an absolute joy for me to discuss with people. Just economy in RPGs, how to make that money. I don't know, there's something so rewarding about that. And
yeah, I'm sorry. There is also the situation with Constantino, the alchemist in Corinthus 2, Herod wants the swords, Bosper wants the furs, and Constantino, he wants the mushrooms, right? And he doesn't tell you that if you consume enough of them, your mana becomes stronger, and you get 10 plus mana if you consume 50 of them,
I think it's 5 mana for 50 mushrooms, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. But the point stands, he doesn't tell you why he wants the mushrooms, and so you give him all the mushrooms, and once you cross a certain threshold, he's like, okay, I tell you the secret, if you eat mushrooms, you get more mana. And you're like, damn, man, where are my mushrooms? I want to buy them back, which is interesting to know. This is also something that I hope for in future installations, that you have got some regular items, but consuming them just like apples and mushrooms, you get stronger by eating them, even if it's just 1 point. I always like the idea of these fluff things in the game.
Yeah, small Easter eggs and secrets like that. And actually this, I guess, takes us to the final topic I had in mind. And, just to get into our impressions from the playable Nyras demo altogether, although we touched a couple of points already. And what we really want the remake to nail, if it should be just one thing. But one thing that also popped into my mind is just that it's an idea that Gothic 1 already kind of started but never really finished, and that's item descriptions in the inventory. Honestly, I think they are, outside of the strength requirement, the damage output and the technical information and the value, there's maybe like 10 items in the entire Gothic 1 that have some lore description on them in the inventory, like Ulumul, for example. And I'm really hoping that Gothic Remake will add some lore descriptions, maybe mentioning places like Archolos, the Spirit of the Wine, or Verant or Nordmar, just in the item descriptions. And I feel they've already emphasized this in the demo, and it's the perfect way to introduce the lore to people at their own pace, because you can make the active decision, now I'm going to read some of the descriptions, or now I'm not in the mood, I want to play, I'll read them later. This is a perfect way to introduce lore to people rather than shove it down their throats or to have them read, 50 pages before moving on.
I don't know. Have you played Dark Souls, Elden Ring?
So I played the first Dark Souls and I played the Demon Souls remake. Okay.
Yeah, so what they are doing, they're not, as I said earlier, they're not very upfront with the lore and the plot and whatever, the story, the world building and all that. And one essential part of telling their story is through item descriptions. And I don't think that this is the way to go for Gothic, but I can see it definitely be a part of it. And as you said, little pieces of information under certain items, even if it's just a sword, you can write like it's just a plain sword, And if you've got a more elaborate sword, you can maybe put a little text under it. This is usually the standard variant of sword that is given to a Myrtanian officer or something like this. Little pieces, little hints and stuff, Lore being told through items, lore being told through scrolls and books and all this kind of stuff, being told through ambient dialogue that you can pick up, active dialogue, and just by witnessing and observing certain situations. This is a great way to go, and this is what I'm hoping for, that the remake is going into deep with, because there is much potential. And again, I'm not the fan of constant exposition on the player. It's also, you found tons of books, and then one day you're saying, okay, I found these books, I want to sell them, but first, for some money, obviously, you can sell all this shit, and before you do that, I'm going for the campfire in the outer ring, and I'm going to read all these books, and then you find out about these things, and that is a beautiful way actually to implement more lore without it being too on the nose. It's just the right stuff for people like me who want to dive into the lore and who want to know more about the machinations of certain organizations or things that happened in the world, the history of Myrtana and all these kind of things. It's just a beautiful way of doing this. So what do I expect of the remake? Just another short addition. This is also a small point that I'm going to criticize about the Nyras demo. They already put some of these descriptions under certain items, which is cool. But one thing that I didn't like is you pick up a note from Yorick, and you cannot open it.
Yep.
It just says there is some mysterious drawing on it, and I'm like, oh, what is it? Is it the Sleeper's Mask? Most likely, probably, I don't know. I wanted to see that because Redford seems kind of fearful of what is on that little piece of paper that you actually found, of those scribbles,
Doesn't want you to tell it to Drex, yeah.
Exactly. And this is where I'm like, okay, I also want more fluff items to be used. Like there is a pipe in Gothic 1, you couldn't use it. Sit down and smoke a pipe or something, just like the weed that you got from the swamp. But talking generally, so what I think what a remake really should do is, first of all, it should carry over the spirit of the original, right? You have years of people doing critiques on the game, right? What was a good decision that the original people did, and what was a bad decision many people did. And to conclude, many people have already said this, but there are not enough quests throughout the game, side quests.
Agreed.
There is the main story, sure, but quests, for example, more quests. And that is specifically meant for Gothic. This is not like what should a remake in general do, but in this case, I'm talking Gothic, right? So more quests, more in-depth lore about certain things, how organizations like the camps work, but also trying to go back and find out more about the original vision that Mike Hoge and the others had for the game, and implementing stuff that was meant to be, and then it's kind of a gamble. I said earlier, not every piece of cut content should be restored, but there are some things that just make sense. In my opinion, cut locations is like a big thing. Northwestern mountain pass. You've got the abandoned mine, which the flooded mine, it's called right now, which will be a part of the game and it will be expanded on. Then you have the underground Orc City. Bro, I do love that place so fucking much. I like the idea of the orcs having a huge underground place, because what we see in front of the Sleeper Temple, this is not a city. They call it the city of the orcs, but it's just 3 huts or whatever.
Fortification, yeah.
Yeah, but it's basically a spiritual place. It's the Orc Temple, but you need a place to show where the orcs actually live. And there are screenshots out right now which show you the area, and it's obviously more than in the original. But again, I do really love the idea of an underground Orc City, because them being some kind of a subterranean race, but also they go out for hunting and they have their settlements in the overworld. This is cool, but also having this strong connection to the underground, I always found it very, very intriguing. And just as you said, with the Switch version, the mountain pass, the Orc City is also in the game. You can glitch through a wall and then you can actually explore the underground Orc City, because it was fully modeled. And the files are basically in the game. This is something that I would see.
Honestly, this would... Oh, sorry for cutting in. Just
go on.
This would... You know how in Gothic 2 they use the huge orcish wall as a technical limitation? But lore-wise they presented it that the orcs are hiding their real numbers behind it, so that the paladins will never know just how much of an army they're facing. This reminds me of that via being underground, no one on surface would have any idea just how numerous and powerful the orcs are.
Oh yeah,
and that's terrifying. It's like you're living on a kettle that's about to reach a boiling point, and you never know when they're gonna go on surface and go crazy. This is amazing. Like, it makes Colony such a scarier place. Love it.
In the original vision of Gothic, the underground places had way more significance. It was kind of meant that you had the overworld, but the overworld had several entrance points into the underground, and that these places underground were also connected, right? There was I remember from the files that there was some kind of magic tunnel that also connected these places. Which
so like a fast travel system, maybe?
I don't really know. It was just a scribble, and in German there was no description of it. But it was very interesting. You saw like how the free mine was connected to this place, and the underground Orc City was connected to this place. Again, and I think this is world building. It gives you another piece of lore behind the orcs. What do they prefer? Where do they sleep? What kind of environment are they familiar with? What is their habitat, so to speak? These things should be in the game, in my opinion. And then obviously you've got stuff like, okay, quality of life changes in a remake, right? trading was an absolute horror show in the original, where it was a very logical approach, because you were actually trading with the NPCs, right? You get 2 mugs, a loot, and some bloodfly wings, and you give me, I don't know, a cool sword for it, right?
A barter trade in a smaller economy, yeah.
Exactly, and sometimes you didn't have the exact amount, so you made a little bit of loss, and it really gave you the impression of you are trading. But that is a system that I can really, replace that shit. Let it go. Give us something more accessible for the people. Then you've got UI improvements. Obviously, the UI. This is something that I didn't really speak about when we were talking about Immersion. That the UI is so minimal and that it just comes up when it's needed. Very, very important. But there is also things that, for example, you go into your inventory in Gothic 2. Gothic 1 had it, that you could switch between different types of items that you were collecting, right? Pieces of armor, weapons, and then there's fluff items and so on. Gothic 2 didn't have that. I don't know why. But improving the UI in certain places, quality of life changes, also meaning like having a quick save option, just bringing it into the modern day in terms of technicality, not necessarily changing the game itself, because like we said, many games nowadays can learn from such an old game like Gothic. Absolutely. But certain things need to be modernized. And that's basically carrying over the spirit in most of the aspects that we got to know in Gothic 1. From the combat, for example, I really like the approach with the combat, for example, that they did in the Nyras demo, but I think there is still a little way to go before it feels like the original, In my opinion, to cut it short, I have a video coming up that explains it more in depth. But the combat feels too slow, in my opinion. And I have a comparison between the old combat and the new combat. And the new combat of the Nyras demo is just unresponsive in a way. And that takes away from the immersion. It takes away from the approach, how you deal with enemies. It takes away of just the pure feeling that you get when fighting enemies. You could basically kill a creature that was out of your league, like let's say an Orc Scout, right? Which is not the most powerful Orc there is, but if you're level 5 in Gothic 2, for example, and you can basically kill the Orc in front of the city if you have the player skill, and now you're kind of at the mercy of a slow combat system, a slower combat system, and that just takes away from this visceral and on-point fast combat that we got in Gothic 1. And this is one of the biggest pieces of criticism that I have. But long story short, restore content that makes sense, that they didn't have the time to finish, and carry over as much as you can in the same spirit from the original. Right? When it comes to atmosphere, you go into the swamp and you've got this hazy green air and all these kind of things. We need that kind of lighting.
You can almost smell the weed in the air, yeah?
Yeah, exactly. And from what I've seen on the screenshots, they did a phenomenal job at doing that, actually. But yeah, this is my opinion, what they should do with the Gothic remake. Same obviously goes for Gothic 2, if there is cut content and it makes sense, restore it, quality of life changes, and so on. What do you think?
Man, so I'm now trying to not just echo what you said, because I agree with pretty much everything you did say about, carrying over the spirit of Gothic and the atmosphere. Although that's of course easier said than done, but they seem to be very well on their way. I honestly feel like an approach of what is it that the original team wanted to do and just couldn't do in time? Let's take advantage of the fact that we can do it this time around. So, restoring cut content. I feel like that and carrying over the spirit of the original, these should be like the two priorities. And I at least got the impression so far from interviews with Reinhardt and the podcasts that THQ at the time uploaded to their channel, that they are all Gothic fans, and we're kind of on the same level with why we love the franchise, and that gives me hope.
Yeah.
Like, this is the impression I'm getting, and that's surprisingly rare in the gaming industry. Like, you often have people making these kinds of decisions who have never played a video game in their life, and that doesn't seem to be the case here, which I'm happy about. And I'm kind of going to combine like my impressions from the Nyras Prologue demo as into my expectations from the remake. One thing that they really need to improve and nail for me is the responsiveness of the movement. I mean, this is a criticism they probably already heard a billion times from people playing the demo, but slow movement I can to an extent respect, but if it's unresponsive, that I cannot, and imprecise. This is something that needs to be addressed, and actually you could get around the colony very quickly in the original. You could, just keep running, jumping, even without acrobatics, although acrobatics were a great addition, or speed potions. And my concern is that if the map of the new colony is going to be significantly bigger than the original, and the movement system seems so sluggish, if it's going to be a pain to travel in between points of interest on the map manually. Because the original has perfect amount of speed. To get from one end of the colony to another using your normal speed, it honestly takes, 5 to 7 minutes or something like that? And this is a concern of mine, that given the scope of the map, they need to adjust the speed of character movement to it so as not to make the game feel sluggish. And when it comes to the combat system, I think I would welcome it even being slower and more strategic, more methodical, but I'm probably only saying that because I only played the demo for a short while, and maybe, with tens of hours, that could get pretty damn frustrating if the combat is still as slow later on as it was in the beginning. Because we talked about progression, and one of the ways you would achieve progression milestones was that your own animations would increase in speed, and not just in terms of the damage you deal. So as a result, much of the combat that used to take longer when you were a beginner now takes a split second and you're done with weaker enemies. And you can tackle stronger and stronger and be faster, and eventually, if you want, take on the whole Orc town on your own. And this is something where I share your concern that if they do slow methodical combat system, later down the line this could make for a less rewarding progression system. So I hope that I'm okay with the speed as is in the beginning, but I hope further down the line the combat system will increase. And honestly, we have yet to see how they'll manage multiple enemy combat system. I mean, you could absolutely tackle, 2 mole rats, or maybe even lure out a scavenger on that hill in the beginning and see how hit detection works, and I was pleasantly surprised. But when it comes to fighting multiple NPCs, if, for example, in the remake we find a certain teleportation rune and get to fulfill a revenge fantasy later on in the story, that's all I'm gonna say, how would that work with this combat system? I can't really imagine it working too well. So I'm hoping that they'll figure out not just the 1 versus 1 combat, but also you versus a potential army kind of combat. And one area where they, I think, have already demonstrated they've taken the right approach, the music. I mean, I was very happy to hear the new main menu theme. The fact that Kairos and Kraz is on board, I mean, what are we talking about? It's in his hands.
It's a no-brainer,
It's a no-brainer, exactly. And just the colony theme you hear playing in the background as you're exploring the exchange planes, this is perfect. I'm really hoping that, it's gonna change as either the biomes of the colony will change. Maybe we'll get to explore those snowy mountains and there'll be different music. And also when the night falls, there'll be a different music like in the original. And honestly, I hope we'll get to hear some perhaps musical cues and references to In Extremo. We'll see.
I mean, the old camp soundtrack is a big it's like it was mainly inspired by Hermannelik, right? It's the song of In Extremo. La 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 la. It's the main theme of the old camp, but it's also the main melody of Hermannelik, which is played by In Extremo, right? But yeah, I can definitely see that. The way they explained it, they take, or the way Kai Rosenkranz explained it, they take the main track, the main soundtrack, and then he adds another part and another part to it.
So layering almost.
Not layering, but extending the overall track. So you got the old camp. This is how I understood it. You've got the old camp track, and after the track that we know is finished, there is another part that is obviously inspired by the old camp track, but is kind of a little bit different. And then there is another part that kind of reprises the original motive, the original melody. But this is one of the aspects that I don't worry about. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I'm very, very much convinced that he does a great job. But I wanted to go back to some things that you said, and it was fighting against multiple enemies. One step that they took to make it easier to fight against hordes of enemy is the cleave mechanic. So if you've got two enemies in front of you, you are already in the Nyras demo, you are able to cut both of them in one swing. That was impossible. In Gothic 1 and Gothic 2, it was when fighting melee, it was completely a single target focused combat system, right? And now they put in these cleave mechanics, which I obviously very like, because it's also kind of logic. You swing your sword in front of you, you obviously hit not just your main target.
A hitbox rather than lock-on system, yeah.
Exactly. Although I have to say I'm missing a soft lock like we had in Gothic 1 and Gothic 2, where you would focus, and it kind of goes back to the Z targeting of Ocarina of Time, Zelda actually, where you put an enemy into focus and you can strafe around, right, to dodge an incoming attack by stepping to the side. And this was also not in the demo, and it was such a huge part actually of when I fight in Gothic. This is one of the main tools that I use, stepping aside and hitting somebody, and obviously keeping an enemy in some type of soft focus, I want to call it. It's not a hard focus, where you always have the enemy in the center of your screen, but you can move your character, and then it's not in the focus anymore. And that is what I'm missing actually, and it kind of takes away of how I approach fights. And on top of that, the slower fight movements, with the lack of a soft focus and the lack of strafing around an enemy, makes it it feels kind of estranged. The combat that is in the Nyras demo, I do like it, because it's basically the same approach like back in the day, with a few additions. Sideward swings, forward swings, and all that kind of stuff is in the game already. But how it is executed, that's where I have a problem. I want to go back a little bit more where you were worried about the map size. So I like huge open worlds, but they need to make sense. Right? They need to feel rewarding. A bad example of a huge open biome, in my opinion, was Verant, the desert of Verant, where it was just dunes and dunes and dunes as far as the eye could see, and rarely you found a treasure that was rewarding, because most of the treasure chests were actually randomized in Gothic 3, which was a horrible decision.
The number of chests you found rather than
exactly the old chests and the big chests, they have this counting mechanism, but the usual chests, they're just randomly filled. We know that the map size will be increased by roughly, I think, 20 to 30%.
Oh,
and
okay.
In my opinion, they should have even made it even a little bigger, because you said crossing the Valley of Mines in the original was like 5 to 7 minutes. I don't really think that it's 5 or 7 minutes. If you go from the very start, exchange zone, down to Xardan's Tower or whatever, I don't know. It's like I should try it out, but I don't think it takes too long. The world is very, very small in that regard, and making the map size bigger is no problem, because in the demo right now, you can sprint a little bit.
Oh, that's a good point. And there's no stamina meter or nonsense
No. The only drawback is you cannot hold a weapon, so you need to have no weapon equipped to sprint, right? Which is a good addition. If they also implement like speed potions and transformation scrolls into a bloodfly, for example, you've got still the the fast as fuck way to move around the colony, but I don't really mind it that much. The thing about the map size is that many places in the colony in the original were pretty empty, right? You had some caves, yes, some caves, not cave systems, but some caves which had like, okay, here's a little piece of let's say there's some berries in that cave, or just a club that you already have a better weapon like that.
And a bottle of water, yeah, a real treasure.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not expecting that every cave has the most legendary sword of all time. No, I don't expect that, but something more useful, right? And some of these caves were straight up empty in the original. So the explorer in me, I see a cave, I see a waterfall, I want to see if there is a cave behind the waterfall, and I want to find something useful, even if it's just a scroll, that you can use to get around. That doesn't
telekinesis, which you can then equip and use as an item finder. Yeah,
exactly. These things, and but I hope I'm already sure that they will do this. Just a tiny little bit of criticism that I have for the Nyras demo. There are invisible walls, obviously. They need to do that, okay. I don't know how it is handled in the full-on remake, but when you take a look into the Valley of Mines from the plateau, or even when you were standing next to Kurgo, there is like a huge mountain formation that's kind of in the middle of the river, right? The river parts and then gets together after this rock formation, and the little beach part has ended. But I saw this huge rock formation to the left and to the right, and I'm like, dude, I want to go up the mountains. I want to climb up there. And I would be sad if you couldn't do that. And just put something on there like, what is it called? King's Sorrel from Gothic 2, a powerful herb that gives you a permanent boost. Something like that.
We know that probably somewhere down on the beach there'll be a very interesting book later on, but they actually showed in some of the gameplay footage that you'll be able to climb walls, like in a Tomb Raider game, for example.
But it's the wall climbing.
Yeah, and that's the thing, we don't know where it's going to be implemented. If it's going to help you scale mountains like that, or if it's going to be used maybe underground, or where. So it's not really clear how this will be used.
Oh, this is actually a perfect thing that you said, and we haven't mentioned it yet. I mentioned it last time when we talked. But Tomb Raider is one of the main inspirations for Gothic. Actually, it was written down in the design documents, like inspired by Tomb Raider, and it said Diablo 1, which came out around that time, like 98 or something. And I really feel that, and I think that a little bit of, I don't want to call it platforming, when you can climb certain areas, especially this wall climbing, a new feature that they said they want to put in the game. Many people were like, oh no, I don't really like this. Like, brother, it's most of the time it's optional. You can use the wall climbing to go somewhere and you find a little bit of extra stuff, but you don't need to use it. It's just another piece of another tool that you get to explore the world. And I wish there was more like this. This wall climbing seems absolutely cool. I wish they would give us the opportunity to free climb more. So I make a difference between wall climbing, like we saw in the trailer, and free range climbing, like we saw in the original game, where you could basically climb every 90-degree surface, but also crouching. Crouching was part of the playable teaser that we got a while ago, the very old teaser that was horrible, but the crouching mechanic and the possibility to go into a very narrow pathway, basically a collapsed mine or something, just to give you an additional way of exploring, and diving, obviously. These things, man, this is a no-brainer. I'm all up for it.
Actually, in the Nyras demo, when you defeat the goblin, if you find it, you need to crouch to enter its hidey hole and get the goods. Although that stealth button does that, doubles as crouching, which I think is smart. And no, but it warmed my little heart that you mentioned Tomb Raider, because it's like the biggest focus of my channel, and another franchise I just love deeply. And it's literally been Tomb Raider 3 was the first 3-dimensional game I ever played, and then there was Gothic, right? And I think it's one of the reasons I was so already comfortable with Gothic's original controls, is that tank controls were ingrained into my DNA at the time. Now, we are moving away from the tank controls for a good reason, by the way, to more of a... I'm gonna be a mouse and keyboard player probably for the new remake, so WSAD and mouse movement. But the inspirations as it pertains to, you know, exploring 3D environments in those early 2000s, late 90s, that absolutely, I feel the Tomb Raider DNA there, and I think one of the best examples are really the dungeons Sleeper's Temple and then the Temple of Adanos in Night of the Raven expansion.
Yeah.
Like, that's tomb raiding through and through, but rather than wielding a shotgun, you're wielding a weapon, a sword or an axe.
But basically every underground place, even the Orc Cemetery or the old mine and the new mine, they're perfect to crawl around, to climb and all that kind of stuff. Like, there's so many possibilities to do that.
Man, I mentioned Orc Cemetery at the beginning, and here I'm talking about dungeon crawling, and I don't mention it. What's wrong with me? But yeah, absolutely.
It feels like we've come full circle. Maybe it's a good sign to wrap things up. Maybe.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I mean, we've been talking forever, although it flew like this.
Obviously, yeah.
This was great fun. I have just one final question, and I think it's good to wrap up. What's the one single thing you really want the remake to nail? Just one. I know it's difficult. We want them to nail everything, but what is, like, just the one? I have one word in mind. Would you like me to say it whilst you have time to think, or?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, for me, it's progression. I want them to absolutely nail the progression. That's, for me, priority number one, more than anything, to feel as or even more rewarding as in the original.
Yeah. My priority shifts because I see things they do good. I see things they... So I would be dumb if I say, okay, the thing that should be really on point should be the music. It will be. I'm sure of that. And I'm also kind of sure about the progression system. What they really have to nail right now is combat/movement, in my opinion. So
that also you can use your strafe strategy and be a bit of a matador when fighting a pack of snappers.
Yeah, exactly. This is my biggest concern right now, because I think the other things that I saw, they're pretty much on point.
Understood. Okay, man. So let's see if, you know, our top priorities will be fulfilled in the remake. I mean, is it... I know there's no release date yet, but it's rumored to come out this year, right?
Yeah.
It might change, of course. We'll see. Yeah. I'd rather them, of course, take the time with it and release an
I don't care. Dude, if they say we need another year, I'm like, laid back, brother. Do whatever you like. We've waited...
Exactly.
We've waited decades, and we can wait just a little bit longer.
Exactly. And who knows, maybe in the meantime, Mod of the Decade for Archolos will come out.
Or just replay the original. That is always a good option.
No, man, this was a fantastic chat. I absolutely enjoyed it, just geeking out for over 2 hours about a thing we love so much. And, you know, where can perhaps viewers of my channel find you and your content?
If you type in Gothic, Vertigo, you pretty much find me. I don't know my channel name. It's YouTube_7082 or the other way around. Just type in Gothic and Vertigo and you will find me. Maybe you can link my channel in the description below. Maybe we can upload. Yeah, I don't know. We'll see about that. But it won't be like rocket science to find my channel.
So guys, for, you know, on-spot coverage of all things related to classic Gothic and Gothic Remake, you know the man to look for, and already
Vertigo,
done...
baby!
Yeah, incredible work for the Iceberg research, for lore series, and pretty much quick coverage of any new information Alchemia release on the Gothic Remake. Awesome.
Thank you, man.
Okay, this was a pleasure, and yeah, hopefully we'll talk again soon.
Obviously, I'd be up for that. Definitely.
Indeedy. Now let's have something to drink and see you around.
Oh yeah.
May the sleeper awaken.
Awaken.
I am here.
Now, before the sleeper awakens and inevitably frees us all from this prison, I would like to use this opportunity to say big thanks to Vertigo for joining me on this podcast. We've had so many technical difficulties before we could finally get this done, and without his patience it just wouldn't be possible. And also, it would not be possible without the patience and support of my absolutely amazing patrons, thanks to whom I am able to dedicate a lot of time to larger projects like these. So without further ado, I would like to say thanks to my amazing loyal Winstons. Blangoopel, Mick, Severin Drex, Enstickle, Katie Danger, Poo2, and A. Brian. Thank you guys so much for your support and also for toiling on New Camp's rice fields day and night, ensuring that at the end of the day we can all take a sip of a delicious rice schnapps. Next, I would like to say thanks to my caretaker Winstons, Michael McConkey, Karavetu, Rennie Garderney, Blanket Fox, Jonathan Jones, and Dick DeBee. Thank you guys so much for your support of the channel and also for taking excellent care of water mages so that they might one day blow up the ore mount and free us all from this prison. You know, just in case the Brotherhood's plan will not work out for whatever reason. I would also like to give special thanks to my brave veteran Winstons, Andrea Paviglianiti, Alexander, and Richard Dearman. Thank you guys so much for your generous support of the channel, and also it takes a lot of guts to protect the Brotherhood novices from the swamp sharks, but this is what you guys are doing, staying ever vigilant, ensuring a constant flow of swamp wheat throughout the colony. And finally, I would like to give one very, very special thanks to my one and only fine vintage Winston, Akira Foxmind. Thank you so much for your long and generous support of the channel, for all your kind comments, and also specifically today for being part of the toughest gang in the colony, the Old Camp, watching over the exchange place, ensuring the trade of outside goods with the king. This is really our only supply of lifeline whilst we are all stuck in this prison. For how long, however, that remains to be seen. And on a final note, I'd like to say thanks to my free Patreon members as well as to all of you guys watching and making it this far. This was an absolute blast of a video, kind of a dream coming true as I've been watching Vertigo's channel for quite a while. Again, if you want the latest coverage on the Gothic Remake or you just love the originals and want to delve deeper into the lore, his channel is absolutely the place to go. As for myself, I will see you next time covering the Lost Artifact expansion of Tomb Raider 3. I really wanted back in 2023 to cover the original Gothic Let's Play, and I started work on that. Alas, with the release of the Switch versions of the game, we were promised major patch coming to the PC versions, so I thought, okay, I will hold off of that so that my Let's Play will not become outdated. However, years have passed, the patch is nowhere to be seen, and we are kind of left in the limbo. So I don't know yet when I will be tackling the original Gothic Let's Play, but I absolutely will. You have my promise. In the meantime, however, Tomb Raider remasters are keeping me very busy, and they are the priority for me. Nevertheless, let me know if you'd like more discussions and content like this. This is kind of a first time for me as well, and I will see you guys very, very soon. May the sleeper awaken.